it goes right, it's a slice. If it goes left, it's a hook. If it goes straight, it's a miracle. This is Out of Bounds. If it's happening in the world of golf, we're talking about it. Coverage, debate, discussion, pro golf and local golf. Let's do it. This is Out of Bounds. And here are your hosts, Nate Sharman and Josh Durso.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Out of Bounds. Josh Durso and Nate Sharman here, getting you ready for the Memorial Tournament from the Memorial Tournament, at least one of us. It is the second to last signature event of the 2024 season, and we are about a week out from the third major of the PGA Tour season. So things are ripping right along. Nate, first things first, you were on the course, sat in on some of the player press conferences yesterday morning and afternoon. What stands out to you walking the grounds?
It's just a really cool golf course, Josh, and I had the chance to be here last year too as a fan. And it's just a cool golf course in the sense that it sits on 220 acres, right? Which is more acreage than a lot of these golf courses. And there's not a lot of holes, especially on the front nine, that go down and back, right? If you take a look at the map of that front nine, it's you go out and you keep going out and then you go out, then you come in. It's not a lot of like down and back, and it's really, really kind of complex in that way. I think when Jack Nicklaus, took a look at this golf course, and that's kind of what he wanted to do, and what he successfully did, right? And I just think it's a really cool golf course in that sense. It really embodies the whole fact of it being a village, right? There's some really cool houses on it, and the way it kind of meanders through Dublin there is pretty cool. So that part of it, the golf course really stands out to me the most so far.
How hilly? How hilly does it look? Because I think it's hard. That's always hard to get a read on when we're seeing video from the golf course. How hilly is it compared to some of the other tracks that we've played?
It's pretty hilly. I wouldn't say it's super hilly, but it's for the most part it's pretty good. There's some good elevation change, especially as you get off the tee boxes and up to the beginning of the fairways. Josh, I don't remember seeing that too much of like a blind shot into a green or anything like that. But especially as the hole progresses, you do see some hills.
Yeah. When you look at the golf course, I would imagine you saw some guys out there practicing a little bit. What does a winning score realistically look like in your mind?
So I was thinking about this yesterday, Josh. Last year, Viktor, Hovland, Denny McCarthy were in a playoff at 7 under. And I think that's a good place to start, Josh. I think just being a Jack's course is going to be it's going to play a little bit more difficult. He's not going to want someone to shoot 30 under par, right? So I think 7 under feels like it's a little bit tough for me. I think you're going to be closer to that 10 number. I think, especially with we're looking like we're going to get some rain today and possibly some more showers throughout the week. Also, Josh, it's not going to be hot. It's going to be a little bit cooler with highs in the 70s. Last year was towards that 80 number, and we know what guys, when it gets in that 80s number, guys can really rip it up as the ball really does travel a long way. And we're going to see some wind too. With those cooler temperatures and some spotty showers, we're going to see a little bit of wind that might kill the scores a little bit. So I'm sitting right around that 8 or 9 number. I think that's a good spot to be. If you can card that that 8 number, that 9 number through 4 rounds, I think you have a good chance in shaking Mr. Nicklaus's hand on that 18th green.
Yeah, I think especially in light of the last 3 or 4 weeks, everybody's eager to see kind of a lower scoring event. See these guys really have to work to post a 8 or 9 under score for the whole week. I'm curious beyond that, because obviously we have it's a reduced field. We only got 20 guys that are going to miss the cut, or 20-ish that are going to miss the cut. Where do you think the biggest trouble lies on the golf course for these guys? Is there anything that stands out? Is it like the rough, or is it the green complexes, or what is the biggest challenge from the eyeball sense looking at this golf course?
To me, it's just offside the greens. These greens are, I wouldn't call them small, but they're on the smaller side of average, right, Josh? And there's some areas where these greens are well kept around them, and there's some water areas and some different, penal rough areas too. You can kind of get yourself in. So I'm looking at this golf course. It really looks like almost like a second shot golf course to me, where guys are going to have to be really careful with where they leave it where they leave their putts and where they leave their shots when they do miss it a hair. And I think that's going to play a really good part. A guy that can get it on the green and not necessarily make a ton of birdies, but just get himself in good position to walk out of there with a 4 or walk out of there with a par is going to be really important this week. Because if you do miss your line by a little bit, there is some water that comes into play. And there's some, like I said, some interesting green complexes in that sense too, especially with some closer mown grass too, the ball can roll.
8 or 9 or maybe 7 wins. What number does it get to where you start to kind of stand back and go, wow, I can't believe they got there?
Yeah, I think if they get in the double digits, right, Josh? I think that would be some golf being played. I think you look at a guy like Scottie Scheffler. He was one back that last year at 6 under, and he had one of the worst historical putting performances at that event. We take a look at some of those numbers from last year, and he was really insane hitting the golf ball. It's some of those second shots he hit. It seemed like every single hole he was putting for birdie or putting for even better than that, and he was just making pars. So it's strange to see where he was last year, and now we take a look at where he is this year, Josh, and he's been putting very well. I think Dan Rappaport, Barstool Golf, mentioned that the last 7 events, Scottie's trended upward in terms of putting. So maybe if he gets hot with the putter, I can see him getting in the double digits real easily.
Yeah. All right. So speaking of Scottie Scheffler, we finally got the conclusion last week of this entire Scottie Scheffler PGA Championship arrest mess, the legal side of it. But yesterday was the first time we really got to hear Scottie, unchained on this thing and talking about it during his press conference. You were there. You were in the room. Talk to us about how he sounded, what his attitude was towards it, and what stood out to you.
Yeah, he had a very positive attitude towards it, but I think it was kind of a literal sort of view from Scottie Scheffler, which is something that's interesting. He kind of made sort of not exact comments, but like stuff like, now that it's kind of over and that the charges are dropped, we could talk about it a little bit more and let that, we let the legal process play out, which is something he talked about a lot as it gone along. And he was kind of happy to see that his story lined up exactly like what actually happened. Kind of like it was very similar in terms of, we saw those videos that came out after the fact and eyewitness attempts with Darlington being there and some other big journalists, reputable journalists being there as well, that his story really came out the same of kind of what happened. So I think he's kind of excited to sort of put that aside for him. He did say, it's not, obviously, and I think everyone can kind of agree with this, it's not ideal, even though the charges are dropped, to have that, kind of carrying around with you. But at the end of the day, it is good that it's gone by. But Josh, I thought it was really interesting to see, Scottie Scheffler's been very, very kind of pointed where he's kind of stated throughout this arrest. He's been very, very complimentary of all police. He's been very complimentary and very respectful to the whole process. And, mentioning, like I said, mentioning how we need to let this process stay out. But Josh, he seemed a little bit annoyed yesterday when he was talking about it. Now that it's over, he can kind of show that. He called the city Louisville, which is funny. That's going to fire up some of the Louisville people, right? Not pronouncing that exactly correct. He had some other little comments where you could tell that it was kind of eating him a little bit. But this is a guy like Scottie Scheffler. He's already moved on from it. He talked about having that newborn at Bo and being able to share those memories with his wife Meredith and just kind of going through that process with her and taking care of that newborn baby. So definitely the arrest isn't the top thing on his mind lately, Josh. He's sort of put that to bed at this point, but definitely a little bit annoyed with some of the stuff that happened throughout the arrest.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I listened to some sound bites from from his press conference yesterday, and it just, the thing that stands out most to me about the entire situation, I said it in the TikTok that we posted right after the charges were dropped, is that it became very clear at the end that the threat of civil action, which was going to be triggered by that arraignment on June 2nd or 3rd, whatever it was supposed to be, it really, that's what got this thing done, right? Like they knew, prosecutors knew that there wasn't going to be a case here, obviously, and bringing it to arraignment was clearly just going to cost the city a lot of money, and create an even bigger stain on the city for how this whole thing was handled. Because I think, beyond vindicating him, this is also just like a kind of a shocking misrepresentation from the police side of things of what happened. Like there isn't anything about that original police report from the day he was arrested that doesn't look like it was either embellished or greatly exaggerated by the arresting officer. And that to me is just like a huge stain for the city. So, I mean, good for everybody involved that this thing can finally be put to rest.
I mean, it sounded like, just listening to the attorney Steve Ronines and then listening to Scottie Scheffler is that they were gonna take action back at them, right? Like you were mentioning, if Scottie had to ever show up in quote unquote Louisville, and for an arraignment, right? He never had to. Now that's been dropped. It's all done now, and we can move on from it. But what a crazy saga coming out of the PGA Championship. Waking up, I'll never forget waking up on that Friday and seeing the number one golfer in handcuffs as you turn on the TV at 6 a.m. was a crazy thing.
We didn't get to talk about it on the podcast, but I do want to ask you, how wild was the statement released by Officer Gillis's people after, or his camp? We don't necessarily know if it was directly from him or from the folks representing him, but how wild was that statement where he basically doubled down on everything that had happened, but then also, tried to play both sides, saying, he respects Scottie Scheffler and understands how everything played out. How wild is that to see that guy double down after being essentially proven wrong 3 times over?
It was interesting, Josh, because we all saw, Scottie Scheffler come out and shoot 66 on Friday and then get up in the interview, and he didn't knock it at all. All he was respectful in that interview. He was respectful towards Officer Gillis. He was respectful towards the person that lost their life and made that situation even more heightened that day, right? He was nothing but respectful throughout that entire process. And, Gillis comes out with that statement, like when you said, and kind of doubles down on what sort of happened. So that certainly was interesting. Yeah.
All right, let's shift gears and get back into the real memorial talk here. Jack Nicklaus, the man of the week. He made some interesting remarks that caught fire on social media last night about the LIV PGA drama. Kind of just, to me, it wasn't so much that what he said was dramatic. It just seemed like he didn't want to have to talk about it, which I thought was kind of interesting because I think he's one of the few people that folks haven't heard a lot from on the LIV PGA Tour stuff and want to hear more from. What do you take from his comments yesterday?
Yeah, I kind of thought it was kind of admirable in a way. Yeah. I think he really went on to say, I have nothing to do with this. I'm just a guy that lives in Florida, some other stuff like that. And I thought that was kind of cool because I think in a way that's how a lot of golf fans look at this PGA Tour LIV drama. We look at it like kind of like let me know when this gets done and let me know what we're going to do with professional golf and leave me out of it. So I think that's kind of cool from Jack because in a sense, this memorial, it was right after the memorial last year. I think June 6th was the actual date. This tournament's pushed up a little bit. Was the actual date last year where golf flipped on its head and Jay Monahan comes out and announces that we're merging with PIF or we're merging with the Saudis. And I think, Josh, you fast forward a year to today's date, we know maybe less than what we knew last year about this merger. Yeah. And so I think Jack kind of saying that, coming out and saying that, let me know, kind of had a let me know when you guys figure this out sort of vibe to it. I think that was really cool in a sense where it really mimics what golf fans are thinking. And I think a lot of golf fans will share the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I think, of course, I understand why the reporter kind of pushed a little bit and tried to get him to say something about it. I don't necessarily think it was what anybody wanted to hear, as in I think people wanted to hear something maybe a little more juicy from him. But yeah, like to your point, he basically just said, look, guys, I'm a retiree. Leave me alone. Like, I'm not here to talk about that. Like, this is my tournament that, that a very serious, like, take the signature, non-signature event status out of the equation. This is one of the most important non-major events on the PGA Tour calendar. And
it's an absolutely loaded field.
Yeah. Like I think going to his comments, he wants the focus to be on the golf this weekend, nothing else. Mm-hmm. And I like that. I respect it. And at the end of the day, it's important. We got some President's Cup news. Stuart Sink Justin Leonard, Kevin Kisner, assistant captains for the President's Cup. This feels almost more exciting than any news we got last year about the Ryder Cup. That's how I feel about it. Because unlike the Ryder Cup, I think there's a chance we win, first of all, which is nice, instead of just getting mopped up every time we go play. And also, all of these, like these three assistant captains, it feels like we're skewing younger now.
Yeah, that's kind of what stood out to me, adding a guy like Kevin Kisner, which is, something we talked about with the Ryder Cup, it being a little bit of a boys club in a sense, right? I think we talked about that, a lot at length. So I think, getting a guy in like that, getting some new blood and infusing a new look at golf, especially, Kevin Kisner has been around for a while, but he knows what he's wearing on a golf course. So just infusing that different ideology to it is going to be good. I think, especially with a guy like Jim Furyk at the captain spot for Montreal this year, excuse me. I think it's going to be really fun to watch. Josh, I'm just really, really pointed and really excited to see when they announce Tiger Woods as the captain for next year at Bethpage Black for the Ryder Cup.
Yeah. Do we really feel confident that that's the direction we're going here?
I do. Yeah. I think, with it being on U.S. soil, I think turning to Tiger Woods seems like the best interest in my opinion, but we'll see how Furyk does this year. Maybe Furyk gets a look if, this team trounces the international team this year, maybe.
Yeah. It would be interesting. At the end of the day, this is, I think this is the U.S. team's opportunity to kind of go back to the drawing board a bit after last year, and figure out some new processes or whatever the case may be, test some things out for next year. This is important, but it's not as important as next year. And at the end of the day, this really needs to be basically like a dry run for next year. So we need to break those boys club memes and all that kind of stuff. We need to go in the right direction here so that this team looks like a team that could, in pieces at least, come back next year and do some damage at Bethpage.
Agreed.
That's it. U.S. Open qualifying, longest day in golf. You and I were glued to a bunch of leaderboards and Twitter or X on Monday. What was your big takeaway? There were so many different storylines that day. What was the biggest one for you?
The biggest storyline is probably Adam Scott, and we'll talk about that. But to me, it might be the science teacher from Colorado. I don't have his name in front of me, but the science teacher from Colorado is going to be playing in the U.S. Open. Yeah. And how many sports do you get to do this in? I think it's Monday Q. He talks about there's no free throw contest to play in the NBA. There's no field goal contest to play in the NFL. So I just think that's really cool. And Josh, but the coolest thing to me is not necessarily a storyline, but just all encompassing longest day in golf. It's just so refreshing to me. There's no talk about live. There's no talk about the PGA. There's no talk about money. It's just guys trying to chase their dream and play in the US Open. And that's why it's so cool to me, Josh. It's a science teacher. It's Adam Scott, who's played in 92 career majors, and they weren't playing in the same tournament, but they're playing in the same equal playing field. And I just think that's so cool about it, how we can kind of track and go through that and see who gets to play in the 124th U.S. Open next week at Pinehurst Resort.
Yeah. Colin Prater is that guy, 29-year-old science teacher.
Colorado, I believe.
Yes. And he went 68-73 in Bend, Oregon, to get in there. Awesome stuff. Awesome storyline. And I feel like there's always, to your point, there's always those every year. But for me, the biggest storyline is bigger picture for professional golf. Adam Scott missing out. Right now, he's an alternate. I guess there's some question about like how alternates are even chosen or ranked. You'd assume he's at the top of the list if somebody can't play.
Yeah, right. But you would think that he'll get in a sense, but yeah, there's a bigger problem, right? Yeah,
Adam Scott missing out. That's just bad for golf. Like it looks silly because one, and I know that probably frustrates some Tiger Woods fans, but they already gave out a freebie to Tiger, who didn't technically meet the qualification standard, right? And you're saying that you need to stick to process, but Adam Scott's a major winner and a future Hall of Famer. He's one of the most important players in the game of golf from the last 25-ish years. And not only does he have to go through qualifying, but then he loses in a playoff after he played really well. It's not like he played poorly in qualifying, and he's got the streak going, which historically for the game of golf is incredibly important too. The whole thing just feels so outdated and backwards. I understand you want to have the qualifying process for guys who didn't qualify through the traditional means, but there needs to be a better process for letting guys who are historically important to the game into these events. Especially, we're not talking about Adam Scott's not 65 years old. He's not asking to play as basically like a super senior like we see in some of the other majors where you have the honor, kind of like the starters who are honorees. This is a guy who's still playing like decent golf. And I think I jokingly sent to you like his major resume from the last 10 years and Justin Thomas's. And if you just look at those two side by side, there aren't that many differences, especially with how they've played in the last like 4 years. And I understand JT has that PGA championship, but at the same time, if anyone, it just goes back to the point that Adam Scott being missing because he didn't make it through qualifying, it just doesn't pass the sniff test. It doesn't make sense. Of course, there's also the live qualification question, which it seems like the USGA is adamant on having a process settled out for them within the next year. But this is something that I think makes golf look kind of bad, not kind of bad, makes golf look bad because you have such an important player that's not going to be there. And that's just, it's a miss. It's a miss.
Yeah, hopefully he gets in, Josh. You would think, he'll be at the top of that alternate list. If he's not one, then I'm really confused on how they kind of figure it out. I've been trying to figure it out the last few days, and I've gotten some clues, right? But I haven't seen the alternate list in its entirety. But Josh, it just goes to show how cool the game has gotten with these young players, and Cam Davis, who played against Adam Scott, stared him down in that playoff, and taking a look at your playing companion, and you see it's Adam Scott, who's played in 92 career majors. He's won majors before. It's just pretty cool to show how these guys have no fear. I mean, they're in the playoff. Adam Scott chips in from off the green for birdie. Cam Davis has this like 10, 15 footer and he rolls it in the center cup and they go to the next hole. So I just think that's so cool for golf, how these guys have no fear. They're playing against Adam Scott, the nicest, sweetest swinging PGA Tour player we've seen in the last 20 years. And Cam Davis stares him down and beats him. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think, and you and I have talked so many times about, kind of the frustration. I know you have a lot of frustration about these events with limited fields. When it comes to this, and I know there's going to be a lot of folks who hear what I just said earlier and say, well, geez, Josh, it's not like there's an unlimited number of spots. Like there's only so many like starter spots available. Well, guess what? Let's expand it. We've shrunk everything. Let's expand it. Like, sure. Make it 180, make it 190 guys. It's one event. It's the quote unquote national championship. Like it's this super important event. Expand it. Why not? But
yeah, I think I think that would be tough because they want to get it all done in one day. And it's just the way they're playing. It's too slow. I mean, they can barely sometimes get 144 guys through in one day.
Yeah, well, that's a separate problem. That's a separate problem that involves guys like Patrick Cantlay and folks like that who play too slow. All right, let's get into this and talk winners odds this weekend. Anybody standing out to you looking ahead here?
Yeah, just as we talked about, Scottie through the press conference and kind of look at how he's played this season. It just seems hard not to pick him. He's the favorite. I think he's right around plus 350. And I think the way he played here last year with how well he hit the ball and how well he's continued to hit the ball with those ball striking numbers, and he's putted, like I said, the last 7 events, he's putted better. I don't see how a guy like Scottie Scheffler doesn't win this year. And at the end of the day, too, we talked about a little bit how much it means to him to win this tournament with Jack Nicklaus in attendance. It's his course. You get to shake his hand at the end. You get to shake his hand next year. Just how much this means to them. And it seems crazy to me to think that Scottie Scheffler won't win the event or be very, very close on Sunday when we start to wrap up this event.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. When I look at this event, I almost feel like this is my litmus test for determining where Scottie Scheffler is and how maybe he's going to play the rest of the season. Obviously, he hasn't had any bad finishes, but now with all of this legal stuff behind him, he's my pick to win. I think he could potentially get back on track here and really reheat up here heading into the third major of this season. Obviously, he's got the best odds. This morning he was like plus 300. I think Rory was second with Xander close behind there too as well.
Yep.
So the usual, all these elevated events, the top 10 favored guys tend to be the top 10 favorite guys in all of them. And sure. This isn't any different, but if Scottie Scheffler is playing good golf like he has been, he's going to be hard to beat.
Yeah, don't sleep on Viktor Hovland. I think he's right around 18-1. Won this event last year, obviously, started to play better. He played pretty good at the PGA. He had a really rough stretch to begin this season, but he's won here before and knows how to get around this golf course. So he could, I wouldn't be surprised. I know I say that a lot, but I think he's going to really contend at this tournament too. Another name that to look for too. He's
got his swing coach back. He's been a different player since he went back to the swing coach that he finished the season with last year. My long shot pick is a guy who, when I saw him in the list, I was absolutely shocked because he's played well recently. Shane Lowry is plus 7,000 right now, or around plus 7,000 in most of the books. That to me is crazy given how well we have seen him play in the last month or so.
Yeah. I mean, he's won not too long ago at the Zurich. And so I think that's a good spot. I like a guy right around that same range, and Denny McCarthy. We mentioned how he was in the playoff last year and played well. Seems to play well here. Has not played well this season. So looking to get his season on track, right? Last year when they were coming down 18 and coming through those final holes and Denny had the lead and Hovland was kind of charging. I had a bet on Hovland at 20-1, and I'm looking at Denny McCarthy, and I was kind of sort of rooting for Denny, which is kind of funny. I've always been a fan of Denny McCarthy in his game too. So I think he'll play well this week. Seems to play well at the Memorial. Seems very comfortable here and needs to sort of turn his season around and start playing better.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Especially since we're about to talk about this, but we are quickly coming up here on the second half of the season. Second to last elevated signature event of the 2024 season. Obviously, the Olympics is in the mix, which kind of complicates things. But it's June 5th. It's going to be June 6th when these guys tee off in the first round. I was thinking about it this morning, and this is a question that's kind of been rattling around my head. Does this expose a shortcoming in how the PGA Tour schedule is set up, that so much of the quote unquote good, important golf happens so early in the season?
I think it's sort of a yes and no situation, Josh. It's a little different this year because you have the Olympics. And then once you get back, you can't really have an elevated event before the Olympics and you can't have one after. So that you're kind of limited in that. And then once you have that Wyndham Championship after the Olympics, you need to start doing the playoff events. So you can get done before the NFL starts, because if you leak it into the NFL season, I think that would be crazy. In my mind, you can't do that. You have to be done by Labor Day. I think they're going to do a little bit of searching on what the playoffs means. I mean, they've had these sort of elevated events that have some of these 60-man fields, maybe a little bit more in some of these tournaments. So Josh, maybe cutting a playoff event could work. And then you kind of redesign how many players are at the playoff events. That way you can fit another elevated event in. I don't know what that means. Josh, you also have the PGA Tour Live merger. You might have some super elevated events like we're talking about in other countries. We'll see how that fits into the schedule. But yeah, Josh, I think as you get more towards the summer, it would be more ideal if you could have some of these events, some of these elevated events towards the more meat of summer, right? Especially in the US. But I think they're just kind of handcuffed with some different things going on. Had to move some events around this year and sort of at a crossroads of what they want to do with their schedule. So I think a lot's going to change the next few years.
Yeah, I think it probably has to, right? And part of this is maybe not so much to do with signature versus regular events and more to do with if you were to ask a casual golf fan what the 5 most important events are that aren't majors, you're going to hear people say the
players.
You're going to hear
Scottsdale.
The
it's not
Palmer Invitational, the Waste Management. You're going to hear the Memorial, and all of those events happen before June, basically.
Right.
And I just feel like you have such a pack of really important events between basically like the second or third week of February and the last week of May that it kind of makes June and July, aside from your majors that happen, feel a little bare, even if they are elevated events.
Yeah, I just think, just because you have to travel overseas for the Open, and then you have the Olympics, and then you throw in those playoff events in August, you have those 3 weeks dedicated to playoff events. It just makes the schedule making, sort of difficult in that back half of the schedule.
Yeah, I also like another big question here to me is how we're going to see the schedule, what we're going to see the schedule look like after the merger happens, because that's where we're hearing that there's going to be basically like these global events in the mix that are like even bigger than elevated events. So you're going to have these elevated events that are going to be in addition to the elevated events. So I just think it's going to get really complicated, but we could see maybe some of those events would get scattered into the middle part of the schedule here, where it feels like, still a good time to watch golf.
All I know, is like a week ago, or not even a week ago, I said, holy crap, the US Open's in a week. It kind of snuck up on me a little bit. And I think they talked about that. They talked about that a little bit too, especially with Scottie Scheffler, not to go back too much to him, but so much has happened with him and outside of golf, the arrest, he's had his first child, a lot's gone on. So they could sneak up on you a little bit. He mentioned that it's always in his mind and he knows where he is, but it's hard to believe that this US Open next week didn't sneak up on him a little bit. And I would sure that's going to be true for some other players too. Yeah,
it's tough. Hey, if you're at the event, say hi to Nate. He's going to be there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Find him. We'll be on TikTok and YouTube and Instagram and all that over the next several days with lots more content. But that's going to do it for this edition of Out of Bounds. We'll be back Monday with another episode. In the meantime, follow us on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube for more this week. And remember, whether it's down the middle or out of bounds, keep on swinging.
You've been listening to Out of Bounds. If it's coverage, debate, or discussion of pro and local golf, we'll be talking about it. Be sure to visit the website. Find us on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. See you next time on Out of Bounds.